Chairman of the Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission, Dr. Mohammed Shehu, has announced the commencement of a review of the current revenue allocation formula in the country. The review came 33 years after the last review, following 3 previous botched attempts to get a new revenue sharing formula. Shehu added that the aim of the review was to produce a fair and equitable revenue sharing formula that reflected the current responsibilities, needs, and capacities of the 3 tiers of government, federal, state, and local government, in line with their constitutional roles. The RMAFC chairman pointed out that apart from allocating revenue, the Commission was also concerned with how the funds will be utilized going forward. Joining us to discuss the revenue allocation formula is Professor Uche Uwaleke, President, Capital Market Academics of Nigeria. Good morning, Prof, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Dr. Abati. It's indeed my pleasure.
Thank you for joining us. Well, quickly, at the moment, the federal government gets about 52.68%. The states, 26.72%. The local councils, 20.60%. But some people are of the view that the federal government is paid, more or less, in terms of the fiscal allocation under Section 162 of the Constitution. Now, what do you think will be the fair distribution formula by way of advising the revenue mobilization body? What will be the fair formula? Should the states get more? Should local councils get more? Or do you think that the formula is okay as it is?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I think the subnational should get more. But it's important to also point out that the FG doesn't get 52.68%, as you mentioned. The FG actually gets what enters the CRF, the Consolidated Revenue Fund, that is the federal government account, is 48.5%. So the FG gets 48.5%. So what you have on top of that, which is 4.18%, is by way of special funds. And out of this 4.18%, the FCT is allocated 1%. There is 1.68% for the development of natural resources. You have 0.5% stabilization fund, and you also have 1% ecology. So those are special funds, and the bulk of that is actually meant to be held in trust, on behalf of the subnationals. In particular. So the FG gets 48.5, but it's still large. If you compare that with what happens in similar federations, such as India. India also has a similar structure. India has 28 states, the center, the union, the central government, the union, 28 states, 8 union territories, and of course, several local governments. 41% of the allocation, which is recommended by the equivalent of RMAFC in India, that's the Finance Commission. 41% of that is what is devolved to, subnationals. So in our own case, as you rightly mentioned, it's just 26.72 that goes to subnationals. So I think they deserve more, particularly now that they are being saddled with a lot more responsibilities. States are now going into a lot more into the provision of infrastructure, particularly electricity, railways, and so on. So the more responsibilities you saddle a tier of government with, it stands to reason that it should also come with a commensurate, revenues. Regarding what my recommendation would be, I think that will be a function of first benchmarking what's obtained in similar federations, and number 2, of course, a product of wide consultation. I expect the RMAFC to engage, stakeholders, conduct public hearings, zonal public hearings, and do this benchmarking to be able to come up with what is fair. But I have a very, if you like, strong recommendation with regard to how revenues even should be allocated, and that is the fact that if you are giving subnationals more money, it's also important to ensure that the funds are, ring-fenced. The funds are tied to specific projects. Now, currently, I just told you that currently we have 1.68% representing the development of natural resources. So that money is for states, is tied, is ring-fenced. Okay, states apply to be able to access such funds. Ditto for stabilization funds. So even if we are going to increase the share of states, my advice is that this time we shouldn't just say we are increasing by 5% and we'll add 5% to the 26.72 that currently exists. If you do that, it means that the money will enter the federation account and it will be shared. And then the subnationals will be at their whims and caprice, to decide on what to do with the money. So it shouldn't have a discretionary feature. It should be tied to specific projects. And so my advice is, if we decide that it's going to be 5% additional or 8% or 10%, whatever it is, it should be added to the special funds component. All right. Special funds component. And in the disclosure of such allocation formula, we shouldn't be saying FG is having 52.68, 68% as it is now, or the special fund should not be added to the share of the FG. It should be made separate. It should be very clear that this ones represent special funds.
Thank you so much.
That's my suggestion.
Thank you very much. I hope that they're listening, since they're currently consulting and looking to put thoughts together before they're able to propose to the National Assembly. But very importantly is about like you mentioned, how the revenue is used beyond just the allocation of these funds. I'd like you to touch on the local government. So yes, we've talked about the subnationals. A number of people agree that yes, because of new legislation and new responsibilities, they ought to be getting a bit more than the center, than what they currently have. How about a case for the local governments as well? Did they come into question? Because we've often talked about the strength of the local governments, strengthening them maybe further, and also how much power and influence on their resources the state governments have.
Yes, Ayo, thank you for that question. I think the local governments are, closest to the grassroots, and of course would also be requiring, more funds to be able to discharge their responsibilities. But let us even get right the current position, where the 774 local governments are sharing 20.60% of the funds. We know that the funds are largely in the control of state governments, which is what has given rise to the recent Supreme Court decision on financial autonomy of local governments. I think the starting point would even be to see how far we can implement that before saying we want to give allocate these funds to them. Remember too, there is the issue of capacity too, capacity to even manage and deploy such funds at the local government levels because of what has happened over the years with the experience of near zero allocation to local government. So the capacity, hasn't been built. So it's important that if you are also channeling funds, more funds to them, the capacity to even apply them, should be there. For me, it's a prerequisite. So for now, I think what we need to do is to first agree that we should increase the allocations to the subnationals, both states and local government. But as I said earlier on, we find a way to put them in special funds, such that it will be the states themselves that will be making applications for such funds. If we put in a special fund and say, for example, the extra 5% is, we can call it infrastructure fund, or we can call it human capital fund, something that is tied. If it's human capital fund, you know that the states will only apply those funds for education and health, okay? And that will go a long way when you ring-fence such funds, as opposed to just giving it to them and a state decides, for example, to build liaison offices or to appoint more political aides. When you ring-fence those funds, it will go a long way to boost whatever little the state is also budgeted, in terms of education, in terms of health. So I think that is very, very key. And then, you see, the present law empowering the RMAFC, that's paragraph 32D of the part 1, to the test schedule of the Constitution, gives them 4 major rules. First is to monitor the accruals to the Federation account and disbursements from the Federation account. So that's the first role you find there, to monitor accruals to and disbursements, from the federation account. The second one, of course, talks about the power to, review from time to time the revenue allocation formula and the principles, upon which, they are applied. And then there is also the mandate to review the salaries, remuneration of political and judicial and public office holders in the country. And then another one says to advise the states and the federal government, okay, on fiscal efficiency and how they can improve their revenue. Now, in all of these four major functions of the RMAFC, by the way, remember RMAFC was established by, decree number 49 in 1989, and it later became an act in 2004. So in all these rules, there is no place in the RMAFC law, which to me is a loophole, that gives RMAFC the power to monitor. So that is where the challenge is. It says monitor accruals to and disbursement. It didn't say monitor utilization. Okay? So that is where the problem is. Okay. And that is why I also think that should be taken alongside with the Fiscal Responsibility Commission now that their law, 2007, FRA Act of 2007 is also being amended. It's now the time to put enforcement powers and monitoring powers in the FRC to be sure that whatever is going to subnationals, is properly followed through.
So another drain pipe I would like to talk about is this, what I call bug off, that is happening in government now. And I call it bug off, buy one, get one free, of development commissions, regional development commissions. We started with this song and dance with the NDDC. Till date, the last we heard of that scenario was off the mic. Some reports say the NDDC has done and seen funds worth about over $3.2 billion in the space of the last 18, 19 years, but you can hardly see that money. This year, they are collecting nothing less than 2.4 trillion from our national purse. Today, almost every region has one. South, Northeast, Northwest, everybody. And you see, the interesting thing about them is over 80% of what they collect are not for projects, are for their personal cost, which is a recurrent cost. So this is a drain pipe, but we have gone on the path of a do-it-yourself destruction again with this drain pipe. Everybody has one now, so it's not a problem, but it's a drain pipe. 2.4 trillion, for God's sake. What's your take on this, sir?
Yes, I share your concerns, Rufai. The fact that even when you have funds that are meant to be developmental, much of those funds go to recurrent, admin, and so on. So it's really an issue. And that also brings me to this whole issue about fiscal federalism, which has to do with the financial relations amongst the different tiers of government. If you look at the history of this allocation in Nigeria, even dating back to pre-1960, independence, okay, it's been an issue. You recall the Richardson Constitution was in 1946. Shortly after that, we had the Philipson Commission. Philipson Commission was also in 1946 that talks about allocation. And then we had three regions, North, East and West. It was also followed by the Hicks-Philipson Commission. And then at that time, the whole idea was to ensure that the regions, control their resources as much as possible. I will come back to talk about this issue of, transparency, accountability that you mentioned. But let me give you a brief background. Then the derivation principle was 50%. Okay. Then much later, after 1960, we had the Beans Commission, 1964, you recall. And after the creation of the 12 states in 1967, we had the Dinner Commission. Now, post-1960, that derivation was reduced to nearly 0%. It was not until 1980, when we had the Pius Okibo Commission, 1980, recall 1979 Constitution preceded that. And before then, we had the Abayode Technical Commission, 1977, that the derivation rate was increased to 2%. Okay, but the 1999 Constitution now moved it to 13%, which we currently have. So yes, more money has been going to particularly the Niger Delta areas since 1999, following the 13% derivation. So when there is a call to increase the money that should go to that region, the question is the ones that have been going to those regions, to what extent have they been fully utilized? As you rightly said, now every region now has a development commission. So it is now the duty of that's why I talked about, again, empowering the Fiscal Responsibility Commission to ensure that these projects are properly monitored and we don't have these duplications. You have, just as you rightly noted, you have a commission in a particular region, awarding projects that a state government has awarded. You also find in some cases the Ministry of Niger Delta too awarding the same project. So we've had such instances. So there is need really for the FRC to be empowered. There is need for a proper monitoring, of these things, and also tie subsequent release of funds to, if you like, fiscal efficiency performance, fiscal efficiency yardstick. The World Bank assisted by, introducing the SIFTAS program that ended in 2023, the State's Fiscal Accountability and Transparency Sustainability Program that ended in 2023, okay, by way of incentives. Today, they are also implementing the SEBA, the State Action on Business Enabling Reforms. So we shouldn't be expecting international development partners to be the ones, encouraging us to, on the part of fiscal efficiency and fiscal transparency. This is what we should be doing on our own.
Okay, Prof.
And I think it is time the FG in particular, brought up something in that regard. So if you are allocated funds, and that's why I talked about ring-fencing these funds in a special fund, you can only assess them when you have met certain criteria. All right. If you have not met certain criteria, if you have not discharged those responsibilities, you wouldn't get subsequent allocations. Okay, so I think that is the way to go if really we must touch on developmental projects.
Okay, I get you. And I'm aware that you are delivering a paper next week on this subject of fiscal responsibility and how we can make the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2007 work. But we have many of these workshops. The same subject you are going to address next week, tax reforms and how, fiscal responsibility and also how government-owned enterprises can return surplus to the Treasury. We've been on this subject for more than a decade. We just hold these workshops, we make these statements, nothing works. What do you think is the missing link, both at the federal level and at the state levels? Otherwise, we'll just have this debate, these workshops, and life will continue as normal.
Yes, thank you so much. I think, number one, it also speaks to the fact that a number of our laws, a number of the regulatory framework, enabling laws, again, have loopholes that need to be filled. I just cited an example. If you look at the law establishing RMAFC, it does not give RMAFC any power to enforce. If you look at the law establishing the Fiscal Responsibility Commission, today, the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2007, there's nowhere in that law that talks about sanctions. If you look at the law establishing the Debt Management Office, the DMO Act of 2003, there's no way where it talks about sanctions. So when governments, for example, breach set targets or set limits, in the case of borrowing, there's nothing to say, okay, you have breached, this is the sanction. The same thing applies even to the FRC one that I mentioned. FRC, Fiscal Responsibility Commission, is meant to apply to even the subnationals. And the states, all the states are expected to also develop their own fiscal responsibility laws, drawing from that of the national. But as we speak today, a number of states, have yet to do that. And even those that have done that, have yet to operationalize them. So these are the issues. So when these loopholes are plugged, for example, putting in place sanctions, okay, then let it be. Let it be that somebody has violated and the sanctions, were not applied. So that would be another level of conversation. But at least let the law be there, and let it be on record that is being observed in the breach. So I think that is where the missing point is. We need to go back to some of these laws, amend them, strengthen them, and then also strengthen these commissions and ensure that they are, in terms of funding, they are well funded, and there are not appendages of any government agency, particularly the Fiscal Responsibility Commission. It has a major role to play. The RMAFC too has a major role to play. And I'm happy that to a large extent, the RMAFC is now enjoying some financial autonomy. I think the RMAFC is now in a stronger position to discharge its mandate. But the aspect of enforcement also should be looked into. Let me even also cite this example. Of course, you know what has happened in the case of even the reports by the Auditor General's office. Each time we have reports from the Auditor General's office, okay, even indicting a number of persons, we don't get to see the implementation. These reports are sent to the Public Accounts Committee of the National Assembly, meant to be implemented, but we hardly see implementations of the recommendations by the Office of the Audit Gen. So these are some of the issues we need to look into, especially in the fight against corruption.
Oh, absolutely. All right, just very quickly before we wrap up, I know you also have thoughts around the weightings itself in terms of how it's distributed, allocations are distributed, inequality, population, landmass, IGR efforts. Very quickly, what would be your recommendations on this one?
Yes, you are speaking to the horizontal allocation now.
Yes, horizontal.
Where currently horizontal. Equality has always been there, right from time. Population has also always been there as one of the criteria, one of the principles. So currently we have equality 40%, we have population 30%, yeah. And we have landmass 10%. We have
there's IGR
effort,
yeah.
10%, and then we have social 10%, yes, and then we have social development factor 10%. We are the one that speaks to hospital, number of beds, and then education, schools, and so on. So those are the criteria. But in my view, I think if we want this thing to be data-driven, okay, I think we can, again, as a way to encourage states to be a lot more transparent. In India, one of the principles is fiscal efficiency. That was why I talked about having something to track, all right. How states perform, and on the basis of that, incentivize them. So today we don't have that. The closest we have is the IGR effort. So I think we can increase that IGR effort, okay, from 10% to say 15%. To say 15%.
All right.
Thank you very much.
I think it will go a long way. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Uche Uwaleke, Professor of Market Reforms.